Alright, what's going on everybody? So I just got finished watching the second episode of Talentless Nana, and today I'll share with you guys my thoughts on this week's episode. So this episode takes place a day after Nana pushed Nakajima off the cliff. People in the class, including Moguo, the guy that was bullying him in the last episode, is wondering where he is. This episode introduces us to a new character, gives us more information on the history and current state of the world, sheds more light as to why Nana is targeting the talented, as well as giving us a brief taste of the battle of wits that is sure to come between Nana and Kyoya. There was a lot to love about this week's episode. We learned that the government sees the talented as a threat and have set up these schools as a way to isolate and eliminate them. They send talentless assassins like Nana to kill them, and the government fears retaliation if the truth comes to light. I really like the premise of the show, and the writing in this episode is excellent. The talented are basically being sent to concentration camps under the guise of being a training ground. As messed up as that scenario is, I think that Nana and the government make some sound statements in this episode in regards to the possible threat that the talented pose. There's a point in the beginning of the episode where Nana thinks to herself that these teenagers are dangerous, making the analogy that trusting them to use their powers responsibly would be like giving a tank to a toddler. One of the higher-ups makes the following statement: anyone who attains superpowers without any efforts will always become arrogant. While we can say that this statement isn't true across the board for everybody in the class, Muogo and Kori are prime examples that prove this statement has some validity to it. Moreover, Muogo's actions during last week's episode when he launched a big fireball after losing to Kori that almost hit his classmates further supports this statement. Muogo's actions also supports another statement made by the higher-ups. Give a man a gun and he'll want to shoot it. What do we see Muogo doing constantly in this episode and in the last episode? He's constantly using his fire. Even at the beginning of this episode, he's snapping his fingers, creating small sparks of fire as he speaks to Nana about Nakajima. Not only that, but he was on the verge of fighting with Kori once again. I definitely think that the government has a right to be concerned by the safety of humanity with people like Muogo walking around with no self-control and a short temper. Something little to note that I like about this so far is that every student seems to have an estimated kill count by the government. We saw that last week that Nakajima's potential kill count was 1 million. We learned that the new character introduced this week, Shibusawa, has a potential kill count of 800,000. Shibusawa's power allows him to travel back in time. I won't spoil the specifics of how his power works, but I like the unique wrinkle that the author Loose Boy added in terms of the limits of his power. The second they mentioned time travel, I immediately thought to myself, okay, this is how Nakajima is going to be brought back. Even though we're led to believe that Shibusawa was led to his death by the end of this episode, something tells me that we haven't seen the last of him or Nakajima. Also, the fact that Nakajima is listed as a main character and shown prominently in the promotional art for the show also leads me to believe that he'll be coming back eventually. I won't spoil how Nana manages to take Shibusawa out by the end of the episode, but how she did it was quite clever. That leads me to another thing about this episode that I really enjoyed, and that is the fact that we get to see how clever and intelligent Nana is. Throughout this episode, we get to know what Nana is thinking about the talented she interacts with, and we get to see a lot of her thought process. This episode shows off more of Nana's deductive skills as she interacts with Kori, Shibusawa, and eventually Kyoya. During last week's review, I kept mentioning how much the first episode reminded me of My Hero Academia. Well, episode 2 feels much more like Death Note. Not only do we constantly get moments of Nana accurately assessing those around her, but her first interaction with Kyoya and the constant visual effect used throughout the episode feels very reminiscent of Death Note. In the scene where Nana and Shibusawa are finished eating, Kyoya shows up to inquire about Nakajima. He starts caressing Nana's hair while speaking to her, and when asked why he's doing it, he just says because he has to touch it. He explains that his sister also has pigtails. This moment reminded me of L from Death Note and how he had a lot of weird tendencies. It's clear that Kyoya will be the L of this series, and I can't wait to see these two characters try to outwit each other. Also, throughout this episode, we get this red fade over everything. Sometimes when Nana is deducing things or expressing concern or her inner feelings when she is thinking to herself. This constant visual, for lack of a better word, gimmick is very similar to what is done in Death Note whenever Light thinks to himself while in Kira mode. This contextual trick is used in much the same way with Nana as it was with Light in that series. Light's eyes would glow red, and then there would be this red tint around his body just to show how evil he was and his true self. Overall, I thought that this week's episode was excellent, and I'm looking forward to next week. I'm sure Kyoya will become even more suspicious of Nana next week, now that Shibusawa is gone. Let me know what you guys think about this week's episode. Like the video if you guys enjoy listening to this review, and thank you guys for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.